just about ready. I will ask council to come on screen.
We're all set now, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 52nd session of council on this Monday, August the 9th. Right? And we are in a virtual meeting once again, and we will be for the foreseeable future. So this being a virtual meeting, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, the Council's Rules of Procedure, Code of Conduct, and other pertinent legislation apply to these proceedings as if they were an in-person meeting. If any member's connection to the meeting is interrupted, I will ask council to pause until the member can reconnect. If the member has not reconnected within 5 minutes, then the meeting will resume, assuming that we still have quorum. And with that, I will note that both Councillors Porter and Park have issued their regrets for this evening. And moving forward, so we are called to order at 7 o'clock. We have been in closed session for the starting at 6 o'clock this evening. We went into closed session to review and approve closed session minutes with regard to an offer to purchase for land within the Taylor Kidd Industrial Park, and under Bill 68, information explicitly supplied in confidence with regards to an agreement negotiations. And council provided direction and approved the minutes. We move on to open forum. And we're not holding open forum under virtual meetings, but if there was anyone who wished to do so, they could contact the clerk. Madam Clerk, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward under the open forum?
No one provided advance notice, and just if anyone had their hand raised, there's none at this time.
Okay, thank you. If there is anyone in the audience who wishes to join the open forum, I would ask them to put the digital hand up now. Seeing none, unless the clerk catches one, right, we will move forward. Item number 4 is the public meetings and notices of public meeting. There is no public meeting this evening. However, there is a notice of public meeting where minor amendments to the procedural bylaw will be presented at the September 13th, 2021 council meeting for public comment. Confirmation of the agenda. Is there anything to add to the agenda this evening?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, and then I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Townend, thank you. So moved. Do I have a seconder? And Councillor Gordon, thank you. Any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we'll move forward. We move to minutes. 7.1 is a confirmation of the minutes of the 51st session of council, July the 12th of 2021. We have the minutes before us. Are there any noted errors or omissions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve those minutes? Deputy, thank you. Councillor Buderick, thank you. And any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We go to 7.2, the confirmation of the minutes and recommendations from the August 3rd, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting. We have those minutes before us and with the separated resolutions. Council, what are your, first of all, are there any errors or omissions noted in the minutes? Seeing none, I go to council for the recommendations. Deputy? So moved. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Buderick, thank you. And any comments? Anyone? And I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We move to 8, delegations. Our first delegation this evening is Mr. Mirabella from Hempson Consulting. And we have staff on board as well to introduce. Ms. McNevin.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. We have Andrew Mirabella here with us tonight from Hempson Consulting. As you may recall, he was instrumental, him and his team were instrumental in completing the impost study back in 2019. Tonight, he will be presenting the new draft development charges and outline overall change from what the township is currently imposing. So to keep it short, Debbie, we can jump right in and pass the reins over to Mr. Mirabella to get started if he's ready. Thanks.
Through your worship, it should be that he can just share a screen.
And Mr. Mirabella needs to share a screen. And,
Yep, good evening, everyone. I will share screen.
and good evening. Go ahead.
Okay, can everyone see the screen?
I'm seeing nods. Yes.
All right, great, thank you. Well, pleasure to be back in front of you today. My name is Andrew Mirabella, Senior Consultant at Hempson. As Brianne mentioned, we're retained to undertake the township's development charge background study. And obviously this is looking at just the DC study itself, and to Brianne's point, the impost fees, anything water and wastewater related is kind of excluded from today's discussion as it relates to charges only levied under the TCA. So there's a couple items on today's agenda. We'll go over quickly what development charges are, and then we'll look at kind of the key inputs into the DC calculations itself, both the development forecast and the capital program summary in terms of the projects themselves. I understand you've been provided with the more detailed capital program items, but nonetheless, I'll go through a high level of kind of what's driving the program and what's driving the calculations themselves. Those two items in itself will create the draft calculated rates, and we'll go through what that looks like both residentially and non-residentially, and then we'll look at what that what your rates currently look like as compared to your existing rates and other municipal comparators in your region and kind of other Ontario municipalities. Then we'll cap off with just implementation options and next steps and what our timeline does look like at this particular moment. So I'll try to keep this concise. I know I have 15 minutes, but there's a little bit of information to go through, so I'll do my best here. So in terms of development charges, just as most of you are probably familiar with it, but there are fees imposed on development to fund development-related capital costs. What the intention is, as the municipality grows, new infrastructure and facilities are effectively required in order to maintain service level. You might need new roads, new facilities, new vehicles, all in which to maintain your level of service as a result of the growth that's occurring. The principle behind DCs is that growth pays for growth. So the financial burden and the implications of growth aren't really put on your existing ratepayers or taxpayers. It's borne by new development that's taking place. In terms of the Development Charge Act and what our study purpose is, so the DCA is pretty prescriptive in terms of what we can and can't do. In order for us to pass a new bylaw, it requires a background study and a public process. We are at the point in time here where we have draft rates and we have all the inputs to prepare the background study, but that study will be formally made public hopefully towards the end of this month, and a public process following that with the development community, both formally and informally, will occur at that time. A bylaw has a maximum life of 5 years. You passed an interim bylaw last year, and we need to pass a new bylaw in order to continue collecting DCs to ensure that our capital program and the DCs that are collected match the projects that we've identified. Restrictions on eligible services and categories and the actual quantum of the cost that can actually be recovered from development charges. You have the ability to levy the charge municipal-wide or area-specific, and the funds itself have to be put into a specific reserve fund. They're obligatory reserves, so you can't use those funds for other purposes. They have to be used in the manner they were collected for. We, again, as I mentioned, we're retained to prepare this DC background study in accordance with the Development Charges Act to inform the passage of a new bylaw only for these applicable services. As mentioned, we do not and are not considering the water and wastewater impost fees levied under the Municipal Act in this particular study process. So we'll go through kind of the first input here into the forecast. It's into the calculation of the rate to start development forecast. And we'll get into the specific details of the numbers on the next slide. But generally speaking, a couple things I want to impart with you. One, the forecast itself is based on the projections that Hempston did for the township as part of the forecast analysis that was adopted by council in 2019-2020. And the second item is that, the forecast in terms of population, employment, and households effectively is taking shape and takes form of historic trends. On the population side, we've seen obviously consistent increase in population since 2006, and that trend line is effectively continuing in this forecast period. And similarly with households, we've seen a fairly consistent increase in households over the planning period, a bit of a slowdown kind of in the 08, 09, 10 recession period, but generally since then it's been fairly consistent. We're seeing a pretty consistent upward trend in the number of households that are going to be anticipated. Similarly, on the employment side, there was a bit of a hiccup in employment, not just in Loyalist Township, but virtually across Canada and North America with the 09-10 recession, which we saw employment decrease, but then kind of picked back up following that recession through the 2016 census period. And since that time, we are seeing employment consistently increase over the township in this period out to 2030. And again, so kind of very consistent growth in line with historical trends, and certainly kind of in line with what the planning department is projecting in terms of kind of short to medium term type growth. So what that means is, by 2030, we'll look at households of about 8,100 households over that planning period, which comes out to about 1,230 new households over the 10-year period. So about 120 units a year. In terms of population growth, we've seen about 2,000 census population growth over that period, almost kind of 19,000 people in the township by 2030. We have that line that says population of new households, and there's a difference between the census population and population of new households, as we calculate development charges on the amount of people that are actually going to be residing in new homes, not necessarily the change in population in terms of your census base, which is your net population in a more kind of demographic sense itself. On the employment side, we have about 4,900 employees by the end of the planning period, so a growth of about 490 employees over that period. In order to calculate development charges, we look at everything on a gross floor area basis. So we're assuming or predicting about 35,000 square meters of new non-residential building floor space in the township over that period to coincide with the development forecast. So those are the kind of the key inputs from the forecast perspective of what we're looking at over the next 10 years. And again, all consistent with what we've seen in the growth forecast study that was already presented to council a couple of years back now. So the next key item is the capital program itself. And this looks at what projects are required in order to facilitate development over the planning period. And the capital programs have been compiled in consultation with township staff based on what's been presented to council, what current budgets look like, and based on current estimates of what certain projects are going to look like in terms of their timing and cost. From a DC perspective, a DC lens, each capital project has to be adjusted in accordance with the development charge legislation. So not every project in itself, by identifying the project, the gross cost does not necessarily mean that all projects are actually growth related. There's a series of deductions that have to be made to consider what is actually eligible through DC itself. So there's a series of costs, there's grants and subsidies and other kind of contributions that are considered in the calculation. Any replacement or benefit to existing shares identified. So any shares of projects which aren't entirely being driven by growth and have a benefit to existing residents or are replacing an existing asset, a like-for-like replacement, is removed from the calculation. Any available development charge reserve funds on hand in which you've already collected DCs for are applied and sitting in the reserve are applied towards the project cost. And any shares of projects we consider to benefit development outside of the planning period. So that's critical in the DC calculation where it's growth related and can be recovered by DCs or other growth related funding mechanisms, but isn't being included in the calculation of the rates under this bylaw. And we'll see what that looks like on the subsequent side. And then just a note, there's a 10% statutory discount, which used to have to be applied to all capital projects or soft service capital projects. And under the changes to legislation, that no longer is required, which means that the 10% statutory discount, which had to be funded or kind of a co-property tax contribution, is now eliminated, and any costs to the extent that they're growth related can be funded by DC itself. So a good news story for development charges in the municipality, because you can recover more costs. So in terms of the capital program itself, there's a 10-year program that we've identified for DC purposes, and it amounts to about $44.2 million over that planning period. And the graph here just looks at the different sources of funds and how that $44.2 million is allocated. There's 6 different categories of service here we're looking at: emergency services, parks and recreation, roads, development-related studies, and stormwater management. And in addition to that $44.2 million, which is important, the numbers below the category of service tells you the entire cost itself of the project. So of that $44.2 million, $28.2 million is actually parks and recreation related, and that's largely, almost entirely driven by the hub phase 1 of the work. The next important point that I want to kind of you to understand is the pink bars on top. And the pink bars on top represent the DC collection, and that represents the share of funds that's actually going to be recovered or calculated through the development charges in the study period. So of that total $44.2 million, we have identified about $10.4 million in DC eligible recoverable expenditures. So about 25% of the program is actually only DC eligible of that $44.2 million. That's actually included in the calculation of the rate. There's other series of costs that we're assuming some other sources of funding for, or can be recovered from DCs in future periods. And the grants and subsidies component of that, it represents a pretty significant share, about 16.9, almost $17 million. And again, a big portion of that green bar in the grants and subsidies component is largely driven by the hub, assuming that there's some grant funding that comes in order to offset those costs. So again, just you'll see here is obviously in terms of the total quantum of the program, your DC eligible share of $3.2 million is largely driven by recreation, another $2 million in roads, another $2.1 million in public works, and $1.7 million in emergency services. The other 2 categories are stormwater and development-related studies are a little bit less in terms of total volume, in terms of dollars being recovered, but still not inconsequential. But again, of the total 44, about $10 million, $10.5 million is actually considered the calculation itself. So just kind of thinking back to that slide there, and as I mentioned, kind of the development charge recreation component is certainly driving a lot of it, as well as public works and roads and related. And what we have here is the pie graph and the rates themselves of what we calculated. So the table on the right looks at the calculated rates. The pie graph looks at, of the calculated rate itself, what's the distribution of the charge and how does it actually allocate, what makes up the calculation that we've seen. So a single and semi-detached dwelling unit is calculated to be about just under $9,000, $8,993, and the rates are differentiated by dwelling unit type. Multiples by $6,981, and apartments at just under $5,500 per unit. And of that $8,993, your parks and recreation charge represents 37% of that total rate. Public works represents 20%, and emergency services represent 16%, and roads and related is also an equal 16% of that total component of the rate itself. Again, this looks at the services that were considered under the study, does not take into consideration the water and wastewater interest fees that are levied separately and independent of this. So that's on the residential side. On the non-residential side, and we'll get into that in a second, but I want to show you the rate values in terms of your current charge. And you may ask yourself, well, what are we currently levying and how does it compare? Your current charge is $5,746. The single family detached dwelling unit charge that we calculated is just under $9,000. So representing about a 57% increase in development charge. Percentage basis, it's obviously 57%. On the dollar basis, it's about $3,200 per dwelling unit. And what we see here is the difference column, which is what's driving it from a total dollar perspective. And we see here the parks and recreation charge is about $2,000 of that total difference. And that's, again, largely driven by the community hub project that we've identified. Public works, about $700, and stormwater management, about $147. In the public works side, there's a new garage expansion that's really driving that capital program and what's contributing to the shift in expenditures here. And just kind of keeping with the train of thought in terms of your residential sector, how does that rate compare to other communities, A, around you, and B, some other communities that are similar size and similar servicing structure as yourself? Just a couple of caveats, a couple of items I want to bring about your attention here. One, this just looks at the rates themselves of only the service areas to which we're considering under the study. So water and wastewater is excluded from the rate comparison from both Loyalist and other communities as well. And second of all, the rate comparisons only look at the development charges. There's a servicing capacity. Every community is different in terms of the infrastructure that they're providing, the infrastructure needed in order to support development. So although everyone likes to compare, and it's important to compare what other communities are doing, at the same time, the growth needs in your community are independent of what others need, and that's what's really reflected in the rate itself. So with that, the current charge is $5,700 in Loyalist, and that's kind of at the bottom end of the spectrum in terms of some of your other communities. Even with the rate increase that we're calculating at about just under $9,000, it would still put you kind of on the low middle end of the spectrum relative to communities in your area. Much less than the city of Kingston, Owen Sound, and Brighton and Port Hope. Then we get kind of closer to the GTA. Although East Gwillimbury is kind of in New York region, obviously on the peripherals, they're at kind of the much higher end of the spectrum here of $63,000. And a bulk of that is the region of York, a kind of development charge that's layered into here. Spring water in Simcoe County is $23,000 per dwelling unit. On the lowest end of the spectrum is Brockville and Quinte West, $2,300 for Brockville and $4,800 for Quinte West. Again, only looking at the rural area charges, water and wastewater, PCs or impulse fees are excluded from this comparison. So then just on the non-residential side, the township had kind of two different rates in place for your non-residential sector. They're charged and levied on a per square meter basis. You have an industrial charge and a non-industrial charge. Your non-industrial is largely your kind of population related commercial type development, and industrial is obviously for industrial development. Your current charge and what's calculated here is $38.60 for an industrial charge, and your non-industrial charge is $56.20 per square meter. Relative to your current rate, those will represent increases of just upwards of 80% on the non-residential side. So there's a bigger shift in terms of an increase on the non-residential side, just in terms of some of the calculations, some of the shifts in terms of what's driving the need for services in those different categories. But $17.38 increase on the industrial component and $25.02 on the non-industrial component in terms of the increase relative to what you currently have in force. I guess just before I move on to the next slide in the comparisons, what I really wanted to kind of also point out is the difference in the charge itself is the same for every category of service except for roads. Roads is a differentiating factor in terms of the rate and what drives the difference between your industrial and your non-resident and your non-industrial DC charge. And that just relates to the traffic demands and implications that those service areas and those commuters will have relative to those two different kind of service components in terms of your industrial and your non-industrial travel components. Okay, so then just on the rate comparison itself, looking at the non-industrial charge per square meter, your current charge is $30.98 per square meter, and the calculated rate is $56.20. So your current rate is kind of low to middle end of the spectrum. The calculated rate would bring you kind of towards the middle of the comparator list here, less than Kingston, less than South Frontenac and Brighton, but higher than Belleville, Port Hope, and Greater Napanee. And again, looking at solely the kind of services components that were considered under the study, excluding water and wastewater. On the industrial side, you're currently at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of the rates that are levied. These would put you on the kind of the middle to higher end of the spectrum relative to other communities, just less than the city of Kingston and less than Belleville and South Frontenac, but would be higher than again Greater Napanee and Quinte West, There are some communities that you might notice that are not on the industrial list that were on the commercial list. And some communities do, as a part of their bylaw, exempt industrial development from the payment of DCs. And that's a decision of council and a decision of staff in order to do that. But that's something that you might notice that this list is a little smaller than the list on the previous slide, as some of those communities do exempt DCs, industrial DCs. So recognizing that there's quite a bit of information here, and you may ask yourself, so what as council, what are my decisions or what are my options here in terms of the rate? There's certainly increases across the board, both residentially and non-residentially, and council really has the authority to implement either the maximum allowable rate that we calculated, and those rates themselves can come into force at any time. I think the current proposal is that it's January 1st at the latest, or earlier than that. Or council can implement the development charge lower than the maximum rate calculated. Council cannot obviously implement a development charge higher than what's been calculated or what's higher than what's deemed the maximum allowable. And that's both on a cumulative basis and on a service area by service area basis. We just have to consider when making these decisions, there is a lost revenue consideration, lost revenue component. And development charges, any foregone DC revenues cannot be made up by higher development charges itself, and any lost revenue itself has to be made up by other funding sources. And that's for these categories of service would likely be property taxes or user fees outside of water and wastewater. The only thing that I guess I would like to bring into light here is that, in addition to kind of your options in terms of kind of phasing it in or discounting the rates, there is new legislative requirements that came into effect January 1st, 2020, in which development charges are effectively frozen for certain applications at the time of application submission. So we would discourage any kind of phase-in options from that because of the new legislation that has come into play. But nonetheless, again, those are all decisions of council. We are here to provide the maximum allowable rate and what the revenues and what the rates would need to be in order to fund the capital project list that's been identified. I think I'm almost at my 15-minute mark, so I have to be proud of myself for keeping on target here. But just in terms of our next steps here and what's required, we're hoping to meet with the development industry on August 18th. It's tentatively set internally, but that is something that we want to do before we release the actual background study publicly, which is anticipated to happen on August 26th of 2021, with the statutory public meeting being held on September 7th. If all those tasks get met, the DC bylaw will hope to be passed on October 25th, 2021 by Township Council. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or any comments on the presentation and the rates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mirabella. Council, do we have any questions with regard to this report, comments, etc.? I'll go to Councillor Gordon.
Hi, I'm still seeing the.
If you could stop sharing, Mr. Mirabella, we could see each
Okay.
other.
I just was a question on our anticipated growth. So I think he came up with numbers that there was currently 6,851 households, 16,953 residents, and then with the projection at the end of, I believe, the decade, basically 10 years, was 18,949. So I know right now we're in the middle of a boom, but like we have 279 new building permits in the last, this year, and that's up 155 over 2020. So I just scratched some numbers down here, but if we didn't anticipate any further rapid growth, if we just froze at where we're at, that would, by my calculations, that would put us in about a decade from now at around 5,580 more residents, or 22,580 residents versus your projection of 18,000. So I'm just curious on the growth rate, how it sort of doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense in that if we're growing that much and I'm basing it on 2 residents per household, it should be more like 22 or 23,000, not 18. So I just had a question about that.
So through the mayor, that's why there's on that slide, there's the census population growth and population households. So when we do development charge, we do look at both components. The population new households takes into consideration the population is going to reside in those new units, and that would be more akin to the formula that you're looking at, where you look at the new households coming online and then multiplying it by a person per unit fact. But when we talk about census population, there's a decline in your existing base which would occur, in which people, the mortality rates, and there's people moving out of the community, and that has to be taken into consideration when you look at a census population projection. And that's where the 2,000 census population comes from, and about 3,000 population in new households, all based on 1,300, about 1,250 new units that are going to be constructed in the municipality over the next 10 years.
Okay, Councillor Gordon?
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? I've actually got a few. I'll go to the deputy. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things that were in the report. I didn't hear them touched on in the discussion so far. With the industrial rates, they are included in the calculations as it stands right now, correct?
Correct.
So if I know there was a previous motion where we look at reducing that would just have to be shifted. I think it was mentioned in the staff report. It would just be shifted from one department to another. So from industrial to residential. Is that correct?
No, through the mayor, if there's a discount or exemption on industrial development charges, that lost revenue has to be made up from other sources, being property taxes. We can shift the recovery through to the commercial charge or through residential development to recover that lost revenue.
Okay, so yes, residential taxes.
Yes, correct, yes.
All taxes, correct. But would hit the
Correct.
residential as well. And just one other thing to confirm, the proposed education development charge that currently is underway, which was 300 per household, I believe, new household. That's not included in this as well. So if that carries through, that would be on top of what's being proposed in this report.
Through the mayor, that is correct. The EDCs would be in addition to the rates that we've calculated here, and that would be imposed on the developer at the time when that bylaw gets passed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I do have a couple, and I'll let you guys, let the rest of council think about that if they have come up with any more. Following on Councillor Gordon's questions with regard to the population growth and estimates, I do understand that Hempson did a population study or a growth study a couple of years ago. I'll be honest, I expressed my own concern that it was underestimating our growth potential at the time, and I think we've seen some of that come to fruition. We're definitely seeing, well, we just had a census occurred, and we'll have that report come early next year, I believe. It just ultimately, if we're wrong, if that population growth is a lot faster than these current plans anticipate, is there a mechanism for adjustment? Is there a corrective action that is built into this process, or does there need to be?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So the Development Charge Act and the bylaw itself is in place for 5 years, but there doesn't preclude the municipality from updating earlier if growth projections change or if capital project costs also change and vary from what was initially projected. So if things start to change at a much more rapid pace than what we've identified, then it would be in the township's best interest to amend the DC background study and bylaw at that time. Now, that being said, also just to keep into consideration that the background study right now is set on those growth rates, but also taking into consideration the kind of the capital costs associated with that level of growth. If there's more growth, there may be more capital, and if there's less growth, there might be less capital. And so there's, at the same time, the capital program also somewhat adjusts itself to the level of growth and the quantum of growth that's going to be occurring. And if growth occurs at a much faster rate, that means you might be advancing some of those projects a lot sooner. So you might be incurring a lot more costs quicker, but that's also because your growth is occurring. But same thing, if the growth slows down, you might be deferring some of that capital to a later time period as well.
Okay, and that was actually my second question. Part of this process, it goes through and identifies the potential projects that are coming down the pipe over the next 10 years plus, with regard to that, and evaluating them as far as life cycle replacement versus growth related. Is that list still, I'll say, open for council deliberation and adjustment?
Yes, so the capital projects are identified. They have to be approved by council at the time of preparation of study. They have to express their intent to undertake those projects. They are subject to annual capital budget reviews. So they could be adjusted for and kind of redefined, and the scope of work can change each year. So if that splash pad becomes something else, or your scope of work at the community hub changes, those can all be adjusted for kind of in future iterations and can be captured then. We just have to make sure whichever project it changes to, it has to still be considered development related and growth related in order for you to apply DCs to, but they are limited.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my last one right now is for you actually, is can we set a date for implementation that, I'll be blunt about this, we could push forward to use as an incentive to encourage fast development before that implementation would kick in? Is that legal?
Sorry, are you referring to making the implementation date sooner than January 1st, or?
No, I was actually saying that if we passed the bylaw but said the implementation date was, and I'm just making up a number here, let's say January 1st, 2023. Okay. Oh. But having given that much notice, it would be an incentive for developers to get working and get the stuff done before that new rate would kick in. You did mention something about freeze the rates, and I just was wondering if that is implied in this.
So you can have the bylaw come into force at a later date. There is maybe some legality around how far in advance you do that, because the background study is only good for a year prior to the passage of a bylaw, and so there is ways you can do it. You have to effectively make the rates for the bylaw come into force more kind of quicker than 2023, but you'd maintain the rates that are in your current position for the interim period. So it'd be more of a legal thing than anything else. It wouldn't really have an impact on your bylaw. But I would caution against that because of the freezing of the rates that I did mention. Because as of right now, anyone who comes in with a site plan application or a zoning bylaw application, and once it's deemed complete, that rate that's currently in force is frozen for a period of 2 years following council approval. So any developer who's actually in the pipeline and submitted a site plan application today would actually get the rate that's currently in force and not the rate that would be calculated that would come into force, even though their building permit might be down the line. So we just have to be really cautious about kind of phase-ins and delayed implementation, because even if you put it in, the new rates come into effect a year and a half from now, that means someone could effectively take that lower rate, not only a year and a half from now, but then they would be subject to that rate kind of 3-4 years down the line from now, because of that freezing of the rate and that kind of legislative change. So there's some important revenue implications and also tracking from the administrative end on those applications and the timing of development charges. So that would be my only caution against that. We're certainly cognizant of the magnitude of the rates, but there's also the developers are getting a bit of a benefit, and the benefit is dealt with the freezing of the rates, and part of that kind of change in legislation. That wasn't something Hempstead advocated for, but definitely the development community. So there is a bit of a benefit to them because of that.
Understood. Thank you.
No problem.
Council, are there any further questions? Seeing none. Okay. With that, I will say thank you to Mr. Mirabella I'll turn back to staff. We have a staff report before us. Is there anything you need to add to or comment on within the staff report?
Nothing further to add, Your Worship.
Thank you. Council, do we have any questions with regard to the report? I'm seeing none. We have a recommendation in the report that speaks to the virtual consultation with the stakeholders, finalizing a draft of new development charges targeted for January 1, 2022, and directing staff to advertise and hold a public meeting. Council, do we wish to make a motion? I'll go to Councillor Townend.
I move to receive the report and adopt recommendations 1 through 4.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Budrich. Thank you. Any comments? Mover, seconder. Anyone else have comment? I'm seeing none. I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. I'll say thank you very much to Ms. McNevin and to Mr. Mirabella. We appreciate the reports.
Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Up next, 8.2, we have Mr. Pat Finnegan. With regard
invited
to
him in
community.
here.
Sorry, go ahead, Madam Clerk.
I was just going to say, I've just invited them in. Should be joining shortly.
I believe we see him coming. There's Mr. Finnegan.
How are you?
Not bad. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
And we understand you're here to provide us with an update.
I certainly am. I'm just sharing my screen right now to get started. Just let me hide the floating meeting controls and start slideshow. Assuming everyone can see slide number 1.
Can everyone see that okay? I'm seeing nods. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thanks very much. So first of all, welcome, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Deputy Mayor, councillors, and members of the public. Thanks very much for this opportunity. It's been some time since we've spoken, so this is a real privilege. I've just got a couple images here that are kind of fun but meaningful, and they set the tone. They don't kind of set the tone. They set the tone for everything that I'm going to talk about here. And this lad on the left, he's about to stick a knife into an electrical outlet, and over in the top right we've got a young toddler who's playing by the edge of a swimming pool unattended, and then in the bottom right we've got a young fellow who's getting pretty curious about fire by playing with matches. So I could ask any one of you or stop any person on the street at any given time and say what could go wrong in any one of these 3 scenarios, and just about anybody would be able to predict. So it's that old saying, it's trite, but it's still true. If it's predictable, it's preventable. And that really is the underlying theme in everything that I'm going to be speaking about. So I'm going to take you through a quick recap. The last time we met, I made a pitch and you accepted. And as part of a joint municipal group, and I won't, in the interest of time, say the municipalities' names. You can see them there in the slide. But I undertook 3 goals, and that was to coordinate the community safety well-being plan on behalf of these municipalities, to hire, train, and supervise a situation table coordinator, and to implement a community mobilization and engagement problem-solving model. That one's pretty complex, and that, I'll be honest, that's more of a year 3 project, so I won't be talking about that one tonight. So first, let's start out with the situation table coordinator. It was suggested to me that none of the municipalities really wanted to become an employer of the situation table coordinator. And since I was intimately familiar with the situation table, I was the one who led that as the detachment commander. It took me 18 months to establish that in LNA, and it's going strong today while other tables aren't. So I started a company called Upstream Communications, obviously. And then what I did was hired under contract a situation table coordinator. So the first step was to draft a job description, and I drafted quite a lengthy one that laid out all the roles and responsibilities. And then we sent that out through the entire membership of the situation table. And then they sent it to friends and so on and so on. And I was able to shortlist 5 pretty good candidates. And through the interview process, one person in the end clearly stood out. And that one person may or may not be familiar to you. She's a long-term resident of LNA County. She lives in the town of Napanee. Her husband's on the fire department, and her name is Amanda Chalk. And Amanda stood out for a bunch of reasons, not just her resume, although I really like the format. But Amanda has public relations and event management background, serious graphic design background, and extensive computer software knowledge, and a great personality and great leadership skills. So I drafted my very first contract. Being a police officer, I'd never engaged in something like that. And on the 19th of May, 2020, I hired Amanda to work for my company as a contract employee. So that kept things nice and clean. And then I just sent invoices to the engaged municipalities. Everybody contributed the money. You'll see what that looks like a little later on. And here we are a year and change later. So the first obstacle that I had to overcome was May, when we were right in the middle of the pandemic. I had to figure out a way to train and work with Amanda and get her ready for the role in some sort of an online environment. I didn't really have these skills yet. I was in the midst of obtaining them, but I did develop an online training program and worked with Amanda over several months, and she really did a stellar job. And she's a quick study, and she's doing a fantastic job today. So here's some of the things that she's achieved to date, with my help, of course. I got her to take the Sir Wilfrid Laurier training program. So they threw a grant through the OPP and Dr. Hugh Russell, who really is the pioneer of everything to do with community safety well-being. They developed this course. It's a free course that you can take online, and people from all over the world sign up and take it. And it's a course in situation table engagement. So before anyone participates in our situation table, they have to be trained. So she got that training. Then there's a database that the ministry provides. It's called the Risk Tracking Database. I got a hold of the ministry. They weren't offering any training, so I had to develop a training program of my own. And so I got Amanda trained on the database, and that's one of her responsibilities. She developed a weekly meeting summary, which lets people know what happened. If they missed a meeting, it can be forwarded to supervisors, et cetera, keeps people in the loop. She developed a new situation discussion aid, which was something really needed. And this thing's been updated and evolved about 19 times, honestly, as a result of things Amanda's learned by working with different situation tables around the province. Then she developed a discussion follow-up form, which is very handy. She developed an electronic fold-out flyer, which I won't get into what this means, but during a filter 4 intervention, when our frontline folks from the situation table go out and meet with an individual or a family, they give them this flyer, and it tells them all about the situation table. And it also acts as an informed consent, which is a really important piece that was missing and created a bit of liability for us. I've sent you that as well through Debbie. I've got 150 on their way, but they're not here yet. So I'd hope you'd have one on your desk, but the e-version will have to do for now. She's developed a detailed e-guide. There's going to be a link to that to the website, which you hear about in a minute. There's something called the Community of Practice. There's about 44 other situation tables in the province, and they get together once a month and have a meeting and share best practices. And every time there would be a meeting, of course, I was always teaching at Loyalist College. I could never make that meeting. And so Amanda has religiously attended on my behalf, and she participates and keeps me up to speed. And she's learned a lot through that. And then, of course, I added website design to her portfolio, and she acquired this domain name. So we were called the Lennox and Addington Community Risk Watch Situation Table. So we've got a domain name of Lennox Addington Community Risk Watch.ca. I sent you a link to the website. I've got a couple of just real quick screenshots here. This is what you see when you first click on the link and go to the web page. And then when you scroll down, you hear a little bit about who we are. We are stronger together. And when we change the focal point of our intervention efforts by moving upstream, we can alter the course of destiny. I don't just like that because I wrote it. I like it because it's true. It underlies everything that we do at the situation table. Who we are, you scroll down and it takes you to every single agency, every single one of the 25 that are participating, gives you the address, the contact information. And if you click on it, it takes you to that agency's website. So the hope, of course, is that now that the website has been constructed, we're going to continue to add to it, but we'll provide the link, and that each municipality would be able to add that link somewhere on their website, so that when people are looking for anything under community safety, they'd be able to connect and find out about us and who we are. There's some testimonials there. There's a couple here that I'll read them because they're so important. This is Pat McGregor from the Maltby Center, and they work with child psychology. She says, not only do we share services, but we share knowledge and experience from each other's unique roles. I'm a children's mental health worker, but often there are adults associated with the children I work with that need help themselves. So I need to connect them to other services. I have made such great connections through the table. Listen to this line. These are connections that I never had in all the years that I've been working, and I've been doing this job for 41 years. Everybody will tell you the same thing. We do the great work. We go out and we try to derail a crisis before it occurs and help individuals and families. But everyone who participates will tell you that the relationships they've made are really the key. Here's your own James Feeney. He says, sometimes people ask me, why does the fire department sit on the situation table? To be honest, before I became a member, I probably would have said the same thing. Over 90% of the calls for service I deal with require us to reach out to other agencies almost immediately. The connections I've made by being a member of the table help me get the assistance we need when we need it. Honestly, there are so many situations that we work on together that do not get counted because we solve the problem before it even makes it to the table. So in order for a problem to make it to the table, it has to fit the definition of acute elevated risk, which means that something really bad is going to happen, something that might generate a 911 call, and it's going to happen soon. So the table is trying to get upstream ahead of that 911 call. And here's James saying, by the relationships we've built, we're moving even further upstream. So that's a wonderful thing. The only problem with it is you can't measure it. You can't measure what doesn't happen. And so that's one of the issues with proactive models. All right, so we'll now focus on the community safety and well-being plan. So shortly after I agreed to work with LNA and Deserano and Untitled Township, I got a couple of calls. The first one was from this gentleman in the top right. That's Stefan Neufeld. He's an inspector with Pembroke OPP. And he says, Pat, I hear you're in the consulting business. I said, no, Steph, I'm not. And he said, well, we really need help. We're looking for somebody to help us coordinate our plan. And I told him no. I said I was working with LNA and that was enough. And 3 days later, I called him back. I had spent 18 months with Hugh Russell, who actually was the advisor to the government on the Safer Ontario Act. Everything that has to do with community safety and well-being planning, that's Hugh Russell's fingerprints are on that. We've known each other for a long time, but he and I worked together for 18 months on a community safety well-being planning initiative that actually didn't get off the ground. So I thought, why did I do that if I wasn't going to contribute that in some way? So I said yes. And of course, I have a great difficult time saying no. Those who know me know that's the case. And then within a week, I got a second call. That gentleman with the tie on is Colin Slight. He was the detachment commander in Renfrew. He was retiring. He was going to coordinate the community safety plan for Renfrew, and then decided he didn't want to do it. So the chair of the Police Services Board, Jeff Scott, is standing beside him. So they called and they said, Pat, would you do it? Would you help us out? And I said, oh boy. Of course, you got to drive through Renfrew to get to Pembroke. And I made the same mistake I did when we were expanding our family to 3. I thought, well, how much more work could it be? It's 3 times as much work. It's easy math to do. But again, I have a difficult time saying no. So we got started in February of 2020, and I went up to Renfrew. I decided I was going to start with those folks first. I went up, and there was a huge snowstorm, and I tried to be proactive. I went up the day before, stayed in the hotel, and cars. We were at the fire hall, and cars were actually driving into the parking lot and then getting stuck in the fire hall parking lot. And we had to keep running out of the hall and pushing them into a parking place. Anyway, about 7 people of the 35 or so showed up, and they wanted me to go ahead with the session, which was a 3-hour orientation session. So I did, and I was in Renfrew the next day, and a few more showed up there, but I had still missed quite a bit of the group. So I went back and I thought, I'm going to have to create something online to replace what people missed at the meeting. But before I could do that, the next thing you know, it's COVID. And of course, I, like many people, didn't really know how to respond. I felt a little lost. And, initially they were talking about, we'll know more in 2 weeks. And then it was 2 months, which people thought was a long time. And, now we're looking at 2 years. So, I kind of shut down there for March and April. I didn't really know what to do. And then I remembered a favorite quote of mine from Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says, often we're too busy driving to stop for gas. So I said, you know what? I'm not driving anywhere right now, literally or figuratively. It's time to retool. And so I did. I learned about Google Forms, amazing free tool, simply amazing. OneDrive for business. I knew a little bit about OneDrive, but I needed some cloud engagement where I could post things and send people links and control that. I'd never heard of Zoom. Here we are. Narrated Powerpoint. You can create a PowerPoint slide and hit play and the slides will talk to you. So I created an entire orientation package, 4 different modules. You'll see that in a few minutes. And they're all narrated, but all you have to do is sit back, click a button and listen. Google Drive, of course, which is like OneDrive, but different and a slightly different application. And then Loom, which is a really cool tool where you can create a video message. And I use a lot of that. So yeah, this is what the orientation phase looked like. There were 4 different slide decks. This took me all summer pretty much to put together to create these narrated slide decks with narrations that match the timings of the animations, etc. And then 2 learning documents because the ministry wants to see that learning's actually occurring. And then I put this stuff all online and gave people the rest of the summer to complete it. And they did. And then in the fall, we moved on. So here's what was happening. So I was moving ahead with Upper Ottawa Valley and Renfrew. It was kind of like, the mechanic whose spouse's car gets fixed last. And the reason for that is because there's a strong relationship there. So I thought if anyone needs to be patient, surely my friends back in LNA who know me will be patient with me. But my other thought was everything I'm creating here, I can tweak and improve upon and use in LNA. So we ran 4 different Zoom sessions. This is what it looked like. This is an advisory group out of Upper Ottawa Valley. There's 35 members, I think, and I don't think we ever had more than this show up. Now, of course, what I offered was come to the meeting, but also the Zoom meeting is going to be recorded. So if you missed the meeting, don't worry, you can watch it later. And I had a woman tell me I was doing the dishes and playing the Zoom meeting and cleaning the house. And I loved it. And I felt like I was really leveraging my time. So good for her. I also suspect, as you might, that there were people that never watched the meeting at all. And right now, I don't have the technological capability to track that. So I'm working on that. In any event, these were the modules that were developed. So orientation I spoke about already. Then there's the data collection phase, the consultation phase, the prioritization phase. There's a ton of work that's gone into each one of these modules, and they're done, they're ready to go. So where it took me, 8 months to move through these 3 modules or 4 modules with the other groups, I can probably do that in 3 months with our group. So never fear. We're still in good shape. These are actually the 9 stages. So council resolutions that were adopted way back when, then orientation, data collection, engagement with the community consultation, prioritizing what we think are the greatest risks, implementing a strategy to reduce the risk, getting some agreement on those strategies, making a report to council, getting each individual municipal council to adopt and agree, and then finally implementing and of course uploading the finished plan to the website of each municipality. Oh, these are all going to turn green here. I forgot about that. I'll just bore you with that for a second. All right, so now, as many of you may know, July 1st was a date that the ministry set. So they They called a timeout when COVID hit and said, okay, you don't have to have your plans done until we say, and then they picked July 1st out of a hat. Some municipalities wrote letters asking for extensions. They said, no, it's actually part of legislation. That's why they're saying no, because they have to draft legislation in order to make the changes. But that legislation, which I am intimately familiar with, doesn't have any ability to sanction a municipality that's working in earnest to complete their plan, but isn't finished yet. And so I have close contacts with the ministry, and I've had these conversations. And they said, yeah, you know what, Pat, why don't you write a letter to the Solicitor General and just put her on notice that you're underway with these 3 groups, but you're going to be late. And there's a record of it, and there's absolutely nothing they can do about it. So I did that. And what I have highlighted here in red is, each one of the municipalities I'm working with applied for a grant. The grant money wasn't received until 10 months into the first year. Ministry does that a lot. So after they found and hired a coordinator, me, another couple of months had gone by, then we're into February, then the pandemic. So I was ready to pull the trigger on an LNA and get rocking and rolling this January. And I won't go into great detail here, but I was diagnosed with melanoma skin cancer. And it just about took me down. I had some surgery. It was in my eyelid, a little mole that turned rogue on me. And it's only stage 3. It hadn't gone into any of my organs, but it gone into some lymph nodes. So I had surgery. They reconstructed my eyelid, took out some lymph nodes. Everything was healing well. I was taking immunotherapy. I thought I was on the fast track, and the cancer came right back in almost exactly the same spot in my eyelid. Then they were going to take my eye out and a bunch of glands in my face, leaving my face paralyzed on the right side and a whole bunch of lymph nodes on my right. But surgery was 2 weeks away. And in the meantime, my oncologist said, I'd like you to try these. I call them the miracle pills, these very specific pills. And within a week, they canceled my surgery because these pills started killing the cancer, and the tumor in my cheek went away. And anyway, I'm on the right path here. The pills made me very sick for quite a period of time. So I lost January to June. So I'm up and running. I feel good. I have the odd bad day, but I'm really anxious to get rocking and rolling again here. So bear with me. And the thing about this, right? So once we publish the plan, it's a lifetime thing. You don't just go to the gym and eat right for 6 months and get to a certain level and then quit and expect to maintain that level. Community safety and well-being is a community lifetime commitment. And I love this quote of Tony Robbins here. He talks about constant and never ending improvement. And we're going to constantly revisit the plan and change things and tweak things and make it better. So, whether we started July 1st or I've set a new possible date of October 1st. But one of the things I'm looking at in my second life here, that's what I'm calling it, is I'm not going to stress about some of these things the way I did in the past. When we get it done, we'll get it done, and it'll be a great plan, and we'll live it together as a community for a long time afterwards. So just quickly, I sent you a short financial report. You may not have had time to read it, but this is how year 1 of our project was funded. So the project includes community safety and well-being planning. It includes the situation table coordinator and me supervising her. And it includes sort of this other idea where we're going to develop community safety and well-being problem solving strategies outside of the plan. And again, that's what I said would be kind of a year 3 thing. So the total budget that was contributed was $81,000 and change. Spent was 83 and change. So overspent 2342, but that's because I should be making this presentation back in March, and that's when I should have submitted the year-end financials, but I couldn't get out of bed. It got serious there. They thought they were going to lose me at one point, and I've been granted a small miracle, a second chance. I'm not going to bore you with any more of that, but so what that means is April, May, June, July, and a pay in August that I've been paying Amanda, excuse me, out of other funds, not out of this project, my own money. So So if we back her salary dollars out, I would have come in at 65,791. So I actually would have had a surplus of about 15,000. So that was allocated for travel and training. The training's all been done, and it didn't cost anything because I developed it myself. And I don't think we're going to be doing much travel because we've developed this technology and this expertise, and there's really no need to do much travel. So what I'm looking at is reducing everybody's bill for year 2 of the project. So your bill would be reduced by $5,000 and you drop down to $23,000. When does that happen? Never. In any event, I'm not asking you to approve that this evening. I'm saying in the very near future, I'm going to ask that for phase 2, year 2, which started April 1st. All right, so these are my 21-22 goals. We need to do some serious training with all the agencies that are involved. I heard a fellow speak at Queen's one time. He said, when you've communicated something about 4 times more than you think you should have, it's probably just about right. And so all these agencies need to be trained about how to make a referral to the situation table. That's going to be a year's worth of work right there. We want to create greater awareness. We're looking at developing a social media account, Facebook and Instagram. And there could be links on each of your municipal websites that would drive people to that. And we would have community safety updates and interesting things that are going on. You know, Dan Buettner did a 15-year study with National Geographic, and he talks about, you know, the healthiest people in the world and what they eat, right? You want to go watch a YouTube video on what Dan found out, we would drive you to that link. Of course, we're going to complete the community safety wellbeing plan. And what we're going to do is look at grant applications. Yep, I'm done. So grant applications, but you're going to like this part, Rick, because when we find the application, we'll write it, but we won't be able to apply for it. So we'll look for a municipality to kind of host us. And then whichever municipality takes it that year, because we can move it around, we would try to get a grant that would fund the whole thing so nobody would have to pay for anything. And that's it, other than questions.
Thank you very much, Pat. And I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but it was starting to run a little long. I'm also sorry to hear about your health issues. I'm glad you're feeling much better now. That's wonderful.
I appreciate that.
Wonderful. So thank you for the presentation. First off, I have to turn to council. Council, do you have any questions or comments with regard to Mr. Finnegan's presentation? I'm seeing no questions right now. And I think you explained very, very well.
Well, it was either that good or it was that bad, one or the other.
I think it was that good. And I believe that you made reference to this earlier. I think the appropriate response from council at this time would be motion to receive and request a report from staff to address the future and the funding of this program. Council, I won't put words in your mouth, but Councillor Budrick.
So motioned.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Townend, thank you. Any comments?
It's a great idea. I remember when they brought it to us 2+ years ago. I thought it was a great idea to get out in front of everything instead of reacting. It's fantastic. Very much support this. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? And I will add that I've certainly heard a number of stories similar to the comments you made about the situation table. It's been a wonderful success, and I know that, like you said, the community safety and wellness is about planning for what could go wrong, and if it's preventable, let's prevent it, and let's do what we can to do that. So we greatly appreciate your presentation. Any other comments? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Finnegan. Have yourself a great evening.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.
And with that, we can move forward. Just make sure I'm in place. Delegations. Yes, okay, that's the end of the delegations. We move next to the Business Services Department, the Treasurer. We have a report on operating capital and reserve fund status. And we have Mr. Renier here. Mr. Renier, go ahead.
Yes, you lucked out and got me tonight. Through your worship, yeah, just one little thing to add on the report. Just in case anyone's wondering, it does touch a bit on COVID and some of the expenses we've incurred this year and lost revenue. But I did just want to update council. In 2020, we received about 640,000 in COVID funding from the province and the federal government. And I just want to let you know, we still have about 430,000 of that in a reserve fund right now, and that's not reflected in that 49% general rate number. So I just want to make sure that's clear. That's something we would look at year end about transferring that in. That was part of the 2021 project or budget, sorry. But with that said, that's all I got to add. And if you have any questions, we are here to answer them for you.
Thank you, Mr. Renier. Council, we have the report before us. Do we have any questions? No questions at all? Okay, this is a report for information. Okay. I'd be looking for a motion to receive. Councillor Townend, so moved. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gordon, thank you. Any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Mr. Renier. You got away easy. Next up, Community and Customer Services Department. 12.1 is the Bath Pickleball Club lease agreement. And I believe we have Ms. McFarland here. Good evening, Ms. McFarland. Do you have anything to add to your report at this time?
Nothing further, your worship, at this time.
Thank you. Council, do we have any questions with regard to this agreement? Looks like a job well done. Do I have a motion? Take the deputy mayor, seconded by Councillor Buderick. Thank you. Any comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We move to item 12.2, agreement for recycling, processing, and marketing services and household hazardous waste services with the city of Kingston. And again, we have Ms. McFarland. And do you have anything to add to the report?
Nothing further, your worship.
Okay, council. Any questions? And actually, I have a question. What is the anticipated date of the, I'll say, the new regime that the province is instituting with regard to household recycling materials?
It's 2025 is our transition date.
Okay, so
right now.
We've got a ways to go before that. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. That's just what I wanted to make sure of. Okay, with that, any other questions? We have a recommendation to engage in this agreement. And do I have a mover? Councillor Townend, so moved. Thank you. Councillor Buderick, seconds. Thank you. Comments from mover and seconder? No. Anyone else? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We go to Corporate Services Department, the Township Clerk. Right, we have a report regarding the McKinnon Brothers application. And Madam Clerk, do you have anything to add to the report at this time?
Yes, your worship. It's come to light as well through the special event application that there will be live music, and so a bylaw exemption would be or should be provided as well, and just whether there would be a time limit that council would like to add to that when we consider the request to exempt.
Just for clarification, this would be a noise bylaw application that wouldn't typically be approved by the clerk's department?
Typically, yes, and we would bring it to council's attention if it's affecting more, I guess, the community at large.
Okay, thank you. Council, do we have questions with regard to either the element of the AGCO application or the noise bylaw? I'm seeing no questions. Okay. So we have a recommendation basically saying that council has no objections to the temporary extension and that the form can be completed and signed. Madam Clerk, would you like an additional comment with regard to the noise bylaw?
If so, yes, that we could add that in as well, your worship.
Okay. And council, would someone like to make such a motion? Counselor Buderick? So all three? Yes, okay. And seconded by Counselor Gordon. And Madam Clerk, is that good enough for the noise component of it? Thank you.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you.
Anyone have comment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We move to Economic Growth and Community Development Services. We have a report, Lakeside Pond Subdivision Phase 2, Stage 1. And we have Director Merritt with us. We have the report before us. Director Merritt, do you have anything to add at this time?
Nothing to add at this time, Your Worship.
Thank you. Council, do we have any questions with regard to this application? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion. Take the deputy, seconded by Councillor Townend. Any comments? Call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We move to item 14.2, Amherst West Secondary Plan Geotechnical Topographic Survey. And we have the report before us. Director Merritt, do you have anything to add to the report?
Nothing to add, Your Worship.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions with regard to this? We're looking for a recommendation to approve an expenditure to do the survey. Can I get a motion? Deputy? So moved?
So moved.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Townend. Thank you. Any comments? Seeing none. Oh, Deputy, go ahead.
Just, this is a great idea. It's going to be an asset for a long time to have this information available.
Absolutely. With the relevance of GIS these days, this will certainly fit into everything we're doing. Thank you. Any other comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We go to item 14.3, the Heritage Committee meetings. We have a report with two application recommendations from that committee. And does the director have anything to add at this time?
Nothing to add, Your Worship.
Okay, does the chair have anything to add to this? No?
No, Your Worship.
Thank you. Then I'll ask for, does anyone have any questions? I'm seeing none. I'll ask for a motion. Councillor Townend, so moved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Buderick, thank you. Any comments or questions after the motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. Thank you. Which brings us to emergency services communication, nothing under there. Notices of motion or direct motion. We have no notices of motions from previous meetings. Does anyone have either a notice of motion or direct motion to propose this evening? Seeing none. Okay, we'll move forward to the consent agenda. For the purpose of convenience and for expediting meetings, matters of business that are repetitive or routine in nature are included in the consent agenda, and all such matters of business contained in the consent agenda are voted on collectively. A particular matter of business may be singled out from the consent agenda for debate or for separate vote upon the request of any member of council. In the case of a separate vote, the excluded matter of business is severed from the consent agenda. Each and every matter of business contained in the consent agenda is recorded separately in the minutes of the meeting. Is there anything that any member wishes to separate from the consent agenda this evening? Councillor Buderick.
Yes, 21.3, please.
21.3. Anything else from anyone? Deputy?
Yes, I'd like to separate 21.5, the resolution from the County of LNA.
21.5. Anyone else? No? If there's nothing else to sever, I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda without the severed items. Councillor Gordon, so moved. Do I have a seconder? Deputy, thank you. And any comments on any of the items included in the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We will move to item 21.3. Mr. Buderick asked for that to be separated. I'm just getting to it, 21.3, from the city of Vaughan.
I do,
Buderick.
because I don't believe it's, we should support it because I don't believe it's applicable to us. That's a high density populated area, and I can understand the fact that a 16 or 17-year-old may have a harder time on the 400 lane highways that multiply run through there, and the density. I don't believe that we have that issue in Loyalist Township, although we do have a 400 lane highway going through our township. We have many back roads and things like that that aren't an issue for people to learn to drive on. That is all.
So that's a motion to receive only.
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gordon, thank you. Councillor Buderick has already spoken to it. Do we have anyone else that wishes to speak to it? No? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. The next item was 21.5 from the County of LNA with regard to the education development charges. And this was brought by the deputy. Go ahead.
Yes, I would move to receive and support.
Motion to receive and support. Do I have a seconder for that? And Councillor Buderick, thank you. Comment, Deputy?
This is basically identical to the one that we passed as a township as well. So I believe supporting the county, who is in return again supporting us. I think that's the appropriate thing to do, and may help to get the attention of the people that we need to have.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Get down to, that was the end of the consent agenda separated items. We are down to members' privilege. Is there anything under members' privilege that any member wishes to bring forward this evening? Councillor Townend, go ahead.
I'd just like to congratulate our Public Works Manager, Alex Scott, and his new bride, Julie Grabell, on their marriage, which took place this past Saturday.
Wonderful, absolutely. And anything else under members' privilege? I'm seeing none. I'll move forward. Upcoming meeting dates. We are not scheduled to have another meeting until September the 7th. At which time we are scheduled for Committee of Adjustment and Committee of the Whole, followed by September the 13th for regular council and September the 27th. Are there any other meetings or conflicts that anyone is aware of? Seeing none, then I will ask for a motion for the confirmatory bylaw. Then take the deputy and Councillor Townend. Right. Any comment? Call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried, which brings us to a motion to adjourn. Councillor Gordon, so moved. Councillor Buderick, seconds. Any comment? Call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have to council, staff, and the audience. Thank you very much and have a great evening.